All right, everyone. I think we're all here. Are we all here? Okay. All right. We are at stop 6, building the community and entrepreneurial family dynasty, and we are incredibly blessed to have a member of that family here with us today. Without further ado, may I present to you Mr. Norvel Willis.
Thank you. My name is like Norvel Willis, and my great-great-grandfather owned this property. I understand this is the last black-owned property in Harpers Ferry, so we're very proud of that. We're looking forward to developing and making this, hopefully get some grant money to make it, thanks to this lady right here, okay? My sister's also here. This is April, and my other sister, Janice, right there. So we got 3 members of the family that's still here. We had 7 children, and we lost 1 sibling, so there's still 6 of us still alive. But my great-great-grandfather was the one that built this house, George Weaver, and this property goes all the way down to the end. Well, that big tree down the end is the end of the property. The property is probably 80 feet at the top and around about 60 feet, just kind of like a pie shape. And we're supposed to be talking about entrepreneurship here today, so I just want to tell you a little bit about our family and the house. Like I said, this is the main house. Over here, this building is was a tool shed that we used to keep our tools and things like that, and my grandfather would keep his tools. He had a plowing my grandfather named James. We called him Poppy. His entrepreneurial business was, he had a horse and wagon and some gardening equipment. Every building around here had gardens. Back in the late 1800s and 1900s, you raised your own vegetables and so forth. So you had gardens. Somebody had to plow. He had 1 horse, he had a wagon, and he could haul his plow and his hair and those kind of things around to your house, plow your garden, probably didn't charge you a whole lot, and then you could work your own garden. He would come back and you could plow it in between your vegetables if you wanted to when the weeds start growing. So that was his business. But his father was the one that had the ice business that is recognized in the brochure. So my great-great-grandfather had the ice business. He had another son named George. He continued that ice business. George had my grandfather, who we call Poppy, who had this other entrepreneurial business. He also did some ice business. His wagon, it was like a freight wagon. The Eccles Funeral Home across the street, you gotta have caskets. Back in those days, they came in on a train down in Harpers Ferry. So Mr. Eccles hired my grandfather to be responsible to go down to the train and get the caskets and bring them up. So that was one of his entrepreneurial businesses. He also, with his ice business, went around. You had ice cellars in a lot of these houses in town because you didn't have a lot of refrigeration in your house. So there would be maybe a ice station under your house or out to the side. A lot of times it's underground, and they would have dirt over it, and you'd have a little door to go down into it to get your ice out, so it could keep cold that way. So this is what my grandfather supplied in this town, in his ice business. Now from him, he had a son named George. George is kind of, that's the 3rd or 4th generation of George Weaver. He was my uncle. We used to call him Des. I don't know how we got that, probably because when we were young, we couldn't say George, we could say Des. So his business was the home and exterior painting. The main thing was hanging wallpaper. In a lot of these houses, there were no painted walls back in those days, but you could cover it with paper, some nice design paper. So that was one of his skills, was doing wallpaper. And of course he could paint and do exterior work, like out here as far as outside of the house and things like that. So he taught my dad how to be a painter. My dad said, I ain't pulling that wallpaper, but I can sling some paint. So he learned how to paint, and also as a painter, you had to learn how to repair people's houses. So he got books on how to repair things when he went to paint somebody's house, how to build platforms and things like that. So, and my dad taught himself how to build, and I was born in this house and raised, and then when the family started growing, we moved over to that house over there and rented that house over there. Okay, that's where we lived for about 5 years. And then my dad, with his entrepreneurial. He was studying how to build houses. He bought a whole set of books. I think there was 10 volumes on how to build a house from the ground up. And out in Bolivar, there was a home that he built back in we moved into it in 1958. It took him from 1954 to 58 to build it because he was just getting loans from the bank on a handshake. You didn't have to write all this paper because they trusted you, so that's how he got his money. Okay, so getting back to the entrepreneur, our grandfather who had the stable here, there was a stable down on the other end of these trees where he had the horses, and all this was garden on the other side. The lot next door used to be a part of our property, but it's not anymore. So we had a garden over there and a garden down here. And you could come by, he wouldn't sell you no bells. You want to eat, go to the tomato, go ahead and take it. That's the way he was. And outside of this building here was a chicken house right over here where they had chickens. And of course an outhouse, you have to have an outside. Now, indoor plumbing was put in this house back in the early 60s, I think it was. So that's kind of like, all this on this part of the house was added to it between 53 and 55. This back portion inside all about was just a kind of a pie-shaped looking house. Okay. Anybody have any questions about anything? Yeah.
I might as well round it out and ask you about a question. Is it considered historic? Like, is it considered historic property?
Yes.
And that's how now you can get a grant because it's considered historic land.
Yes.
Or something.
In your pamphlet, there is a quote that recognizes it as a historic property. So yes, it is historic, and that is one of the reasons why the folks who, where's Jamila? Jamila's not here anymore. Why a grant is being pursued for it.
Okay, fantastic.
And if I may say, Mr. George L. Weaver, who we are almost 100% sure was born in slavery, he married Julia Ann Weaver Ranson, who was not, and they lived together in Virginia. And the reason why we think that George L. Weaver, even though we're not able to see where exactly he was born, he in census records he's shown to have been born in Virginia, and he's not on what was then the registry of free blacks in Virginia. Julia was. So right after the Civil War, or maybe during the Civil War, we're not quite sure yet, he came and purchased the house that I am blessed to live in, which is the one right over there. And we think, we think that in a white newspaper in town, it mentions that he was definitely a civil rights activist, but there is an article in a white newspaper in town that criticizes him, and it's called New England Meanness. Criticizes him and a group of other folks who are engaging in planning for civil rights activities in a house in Bolivar, and we think it's that house. So, and as Mr. Willis says, this house is, we think, the only extant structure, commercial structure built by an African-American family that's left in Harpers Ferry. And that's one reason why it is so very valuable and so important to preserve, if possible. So, did I miss anything?
That's it. No, that's it.
The other thing I wanted you to know is the Weaver family founded the John Wesley Church, which is next to the First Zion Church that we are going to now go back to. And there is, it combined with the big red church that we walked past, and there is a stained glass window honoring George L. Weaver and Julia Weaver still in that church. So it's a beautiful remembrance of their contribution. I mean, they built this community. And the last thing, I'm sorry, I just, Mr. Weaver owned about 7 properties in the area. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, when we talked about the struggles, the headwinds that he faced to become such a large property owner and business person, successful business person, giving of their time to actually establish a church. They were the first stewards of Cedar Hill Cemetery. And everything that he was able to accomplish in his lifetime, and then his family continued that service and those amazing accomplishment. So now you see why we're so grateful that Mr. Willis has decided to share with us his family background.